Listen, I'm not here to put anybody on blast or anything.
Oh, no.
I'm not going to name any names.
Are you upset? Are you feuding with a brand?
Well, hang on. I just said I'm not going to name any names.
It sounds like you're feuding with a brand, Brad.
Someone recently may have described my backup strategy for the archives / projects for this podcast as, and I quote, maniacal.
Uh-huh.
I just want to point out the very next week.
Yeah.
I need to dip into my archive of project files for this episode and make extensive use of them.
I feel pretty on blast here. I was hoping we were going to be talking about brands, but now, yes, I did describe. I did say that he is. I did not say maniacal. I said you were kind of a maniac about archiving stuff. That's different than maniacal.
Are you sure? Hang on.
Yeah, I'm reading the email right now.
Okay.
I said, I think Brad will probably want to archive the source file since he's kind of a maniac about archiving stuff.
Okay. Since I said, and I quote, maniacal, it's good to set the record straight.
I just want to get full disclosure out there. I did not say you were maniacal. There was no laughing involved.
Technically, you used the noun form and not the adjective. I guess I'll give you that, but that's not much.
Yeah, look. Okay, so I'm hoisted by my own Picard here. I know. I know it's not Picard, but I like it better that way.
I mean, see, if I didn't have all those Audacity projects 7-zipped on my NAS,
oh boy,
we would just have to go download the MP3 and edit that and double compress it, and nobody wants that.
I'm never going to hear the end of this. Okay, so yes, you're right to back up everything,
hang on.
Source files and all.
Let's see. Hang on. I'm just going to alt-enter on this TechPod folder and see how much space we're talking. 64.9 gigabytes to date to archive the raw source files, project files for this entire podcast so far.
I didn't say you were making a mistake. I just was disclosing with our new editor for the FOSSPod that you were going to want an excessive amount of backup potentially. And I was right to warn her. So,
gosh, how big? Wait, so these are all Audacity projects. How big do you think? Can I say what she uses to edit Pro Tools?
Yeah, she uses Pro Tools.
How big do you think Pro Tools projects are?
They can be the same. It's just the WAV files don't get bigger.
Oh, of course. I don't know how much metadata or weird other stuff is in there.
I mean, it's not like metadata for audio editing is like
it's nothing.
It's nothing.
It's text, probably. Highly compressible.
Okay, so I guess we should tell people what we're doing this week.
Yeah. The landmark legislation is in the works, let's say. Maybe.
Look, we'll get into that because it's complicated. But daylight savings was in the news, not just because last week was daylight savings spring forward week, the one where everybody has car wrecks the morning after, but because there was legislation passed in the Senate, maybe spuriously, I don't know, about making daylight savings time permanent, which people who've listened to the show for a long time will remember may or may not be a good idea. We're going to get into it. We're going to recap that. Then we're going to just rerun the daylight savings time episode because it's more relevant now than it ever was before. And we'll also do some other stuff at the end. We'll tack on. We had some great letters in from listeners who actually work in the field. But first, we're going to, I guess, play the music. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I am Brad. Hello.
Hi. For a minute there, I couldn't remember if it was past tense or future tense. So
how was I? So how were you? So what you were going to say?
Are we making or are we made? I can't remember.
Dude, I think my brain is definitely still in the past. I don't know.
You've messed up. You've messed up your sleep real bad the last couple of weeks, huh?
I have messed myself up in a way that oh my God. I took numerous business trips to Japan in my 20s. This is worse jet lag than that by a lot. I'm going to tell you, okay, so your first mistake was you took the red eye to the East Coast, which doesn't seem like that big a deal. Let me just very quickly recount the last 10, 11 days of sleep for me.
Okay.
So last Wednesday night, I took a red eye to the East Coast. So that meant getting up on normal California time, Wednesday morning, working a full day, and then going to the airport, taking an overnight flight with a connection that upon arriving turned out to be delayed. So I took an overnight flight, did not sleep on that flight because who sleeps on planes? Got to my destination and then sat there listening to them make announcement after announcement saying, hey, we're still waiting on the plane. Maintenance, something. We don't have a plane yet. And then finally the plane showed up and then one of the flight attendants was MIA.
Oh, no.
So finally got to my final destination at about 1 p.m. local time the following day. Napped for like an hour and a half or something. Got up and powered through. Got two or three nights. I'm trying to remember. It was 2 or 3 nights after that of like okay, but not adequate sleep, because I was on a different time zone and whatever.
Yeah.
The night that daylight savings time went into effect, meaning that we lost an hour, I also, for reasons that I won't get into, got about 2 to 3 hours of sleep and then had to be awakened to deal with some stuff unexpectedly. So both got about 3 hours of sleep that night, right out, 3 days after the red eye, plus daylight saving times go into effect. So like at that point I thought I could I was like, I should not operate a car right now. I should not operate heavy machinery. I can barely walk straight. 4 or 5 days after that of trying to fall asleep with my body thinking it was about 4 hours, trying to fall asleep about 4 hours. Dude, I can't even get it straight right now. Oh my God, this is how out of it I am. It was East Coast time plus an hour. It was a 4 hour difference, basically.
You were in Newfoundland, basically.
Yes, I was trying to fall asleep at a time that my body thought it was my body was like, wait, it's 7 p.m. What are you doing? You can't sleep right now. So it was like 4 or 5 days of that. And I just started getting used to local time and then immediately flew back on an evening flight. That was about an 8 hour trip, which in effect had me getting back home at about 4 a.m. on the time zone that my body now thought it was on. So sorry for that long-winded explanation, but I am so
your body thinks you're in Japan right now. I'm basically
so disoriented right now in terms of what time it should be and how much sleep I've been getting night to night, and just hey, sorry for that rambling preamble here, but let that just be an example of why people shouldn't mess with their sleep schedules.
Yeah, it's funny. The red eye. When I was in my late 20s and early 30s, Gene and I used to take the red eye back to the East Coast to see family all the time. We'd fly through Atlanta and then connect. And that was an unpleasant experience, but it wasn't really that you'd kind of drowse a little bit on the plane and then you'd wake up and you'd your goal was just to stay awake until 6 or 7 o'clock at night. So you could just do a long sleep the next day.
Totally. I also did that exact same thing 2-3 times a year in my 20s. And it was totally fine. I would hit the ground running when we got there and just stay up all day. And it was whatever, I'll be fine.
Around the time I turned 40, we went to New York with Tested with a kind of big crew of people for Maker Faire one year. And when we arrived in New York, our Airbnb guy had texted us over the flight time and was like, hey, the rooms, your house isn't going to be ready until 4 o'clock. And this was at 6 o'clock in the morning. We thought we had to make it until 10 o'clock. So we were like, okay, we'll get our bags. We'll get an Uber. We'll go to the house and find a diner or something to have some breakfast. And then we'll just go over to the house and check in and we'll be good. And he got there and he was like, oh God, it's not ready until 3. What the hell, man? So we then called a friend who had a 5th floor walk up in Midtown near where our house was. And we were like, hey, can we dump off 8 people's worth of bags and camera gear and stuff at your apartment? He's like, and this is at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock in the morning, something on a Saturday. He was like, yeah. So we carry all of our stuff up the stairs. We get into his apartment and I hadn't really appreciated what a 25, 30-year-old person's Midtown Manhattan apartment was going to be like. But it was basically the size of a pretty good walk-in closet. So we dumped all our stuff there, went to the Lincoln Center movie theater because we were like, okay, what can we do that we can all go to sleep in and everything's going to be, nobody's going to be upset with us. So we went to a movie. We went to see Dread in 3D at the Lincoln Center movie theater. And, that was the last time I took a red eye. I'm it ruined me. I was broken for 3 days afterwards.
Yep.
There's a certain, I'll do it in an emergency and I'll do it if it's if I can afford business class and I can like have the reclining seats that go all the way flat and I can just go to sleep, I might do it.
Even then, man, I don't know. Also, I'm shocked you went for Dread and not like the most like dull period drama you could find.
Look, it was the weekend that Dread opened and they had it on like 18 screens there of a 20 screen theater. And also we kind of wanted to see Dread. So it turns out we didn't think Dread was going to be good. And then Dread ripped. So nobody slept. I mean, I slept maybe like 20 minutes. Anyway.
Oops. You picked a good movie.
Yeah.
Anyway, so yeah, all of that said, we are here to talk about the recent happenings in the United States Senate around potentially making daylight savings time permanent.
So Marco Rubio from Florida, Republican from Florida, and Patty Murray, a Democrat from Washington State, in the Senate, there's this thing called unanimous consent, where if you go up and you say, hey, I want to pass this bill without anybody, there's no need to talk about it. We all agree. And usually they use this for stuff like naming bridges and authorization for things that like nobody's going to agree with. Like there's no, so it's like it's a tool to bypass all of the normal debate and conversation and committee stuff and all of that. You just take the bill and you're like, hey, I think that this bill is good. Does anybody disagree? And as long as nobody says no, it just passes. So it's, in retrospect, it's maybe a bad idea because the whole thing works. Basically, the whole thing works because the offices of the senators who are pushing the bill forward are supposed to call all the other senators' offices their legislative offices. Legislative offices are the people that are employed by the senator who are like reading, and they're usually lawyers or lawyer adjacent, paralegal, something like that. They read the law. They make sure that they agree with it, make sure there's no unintended side effects. They suggest changes to the language that close loopholes and stuff like that. And then usually the sponsors of the bill are supposed to talk to those people and say, hey, does your senator have a problem with this? And if somebody says yes, then they go through the normal path. They don't try to unanimous consent it anyway. It seems like Rubio's team did that and Murray's team did that, but maybe not everybody, or maybe not everybody realized what they were actually agreeing to. They thought it was maybe a little more ceremonial in some cases. I don't think anybody wants to come out and say, hey, yo, we didn't read this. But we weren't there to say no to the unanimous consent. So they passed this bill with the unanimous consent.
Yeah. The upshot, just to spell it out real quick, the upshot of the bill is to make daylight savings permanent.
Starting in November of 2023.
Right. So end the twice a year, the semi-annual clock change. Yes, in November 2023, because they said, like airlines and you name it, like practically every institution
computers turns out
on the face of the earth is going to have to make some kind of adjustment around this. So we're going to give people kind of an 18-month window to do that.
Exactly.
That's where it stands right now. Past the Senate, and if you're not familiar with the peculiarities of the United States government, it now has to go to the House, where it will be taken up there and either passed or not. So before we get to that part, what is this at the time of this recording? Maybe 5-day-old news, something like that. It was kind of mid last week.
It's in that realm, I believe.
I suspect you were of a similar mind. I was very torn when I saw this come down. I was extremely excited just to see that there was renewed will to get rid of the time change.
Yeah, but then they did it the wrong way.
And wait, do you mean legislatively or in terms of the?
Well, kind of both. But
that as well. It sounds like. But the thing I was going to say is like they picked the wrong one. Yeah,
that's the thing.
I'm excited that they seem to want to abolish the time change. B, I'm kind of bummed that they didn't pick the one that is healthy and natural.
Well, okay, so the TLDR on what's going on, Frank Pallone Jr., who's a Democrat from New Jersey, chairs the House Energy and Commerce Committee, which is where time policy lives, actually had a hearing earlier the week before daylight savings time changed, I believe, to prevent the daylight savings time change from happening. So he wanted to do that. They had a hearing about doing it the right way and couldn't get nothing happened out of that, basically. His feeling is that there's no consensus in the House. I'll actually read this quote. This is a quote from Pallone that was in the Washington Post, I think. He says, there isn't a consensus, in my opinion, in the House, or even generally at this point, about whether we should have standard versus daylight savings as the permanent time. Immediately after the Senate passed the bill, I had members come up to me on the floor and say, oh, don't do that. I want the standard time, he added, declining to identify the lawmakers. we've done this before. We talked about this in the episode. We tried this in 1974. It didn't stick.
Right.
Russia tried it in like 2012, I think, or 2008. I can't remember. They did it for like 3 years before everybody got so pissed off that they turned it off.
Yeah.
Brazil is doing it right now, and they're upset because it's dark it's light until like 10 o'clock at night and dark at 5 a.m. Anyway, they're close to the equator. They have a different set of problems than we have. But
well, I mean, to put that in perspective, I didn't realize, I mean, we talked about this in that episode last November, and I had forgotten some of it, but in some of these Washington Post stories that we will put in the show notes, as an example, Detroit, under this plan, would have significant numbers of days a year where the sunrise, like it wasn't fully light until like 9 a.m.
Yeah.
Which is just unworkable from any perspective.
So my guess is that this stalls in the House, but I don't know for sure. Like we're not legislative experts. We're, yada, yada. Well, it seems like nobody in the House is going to take up this torch, and this is just some posturing.
Well, so, I mean, again, I'm certainly not one to read congressional tea leaves or anything, but it seems like there's pretty unified will to make a change. Like, which change to make obviously is up in the air, but it seems like everyone I've seen in Congress weigh in on this seems to want to get rid of the time change.
Well, okay, so one of the interesting things about this is that, and I'm looking for the quote right now, but I don't think I'm going to find it. Generally speaking, there's real incentive to get this done for about 2 weeks a year.
Yes, that is.
One is the week after springing forward, and the other is the week after falling back. So we're probably out of the window already.
Oh my God, that is the most grim commentary. Well, maybe not the most grim these days, but like that's one of the most kind of disheartening commentaries I've seen on our legislative process. And again, these stories will be in the show notes. That yes, they basically say like, yeah, there's about a 2 week window after the time change every year before any action to get done, and then everybody's just going to forget about it again. And also, the one in the fall is right around election time.
Yeah. So the other thing, we get into this in the episode, but like the impacts on this are greater for people who live in the northwest corners of time zones. So like Montana and whatever the northwest corner of Central Time is. I think it's Minnesota, but I'm not sure. There's a lot to it. We actually had a chronobiologist write in after we recorded this episode, so we thought there was value in putting both the episode and the response together. We had multiple other people write in supporting the views espoused by the chronobiologist who wrote in anonymously. So I feel pretty good about including that. And the science has continued to come out in the time since this ran last year, continues to support the stuff that we talked about. So
yeah. Pallone in here in one of these stories is quoted, or they just said he is seeking this. Maybe they didn't actually quote him directly, but he wants more study, which, like, on the one hand, more evidence that standard time is healthier than daylight time, savings time would be useful to have. On the other hand, if that just introduces even further delays in this whole process, it does make you worry that it's just going to die on the vine yet again. But I don't know. You tell me, like, obviously, I was not alive in 74 or whatever when they tried this
sir.
The last time. I know you almost were.
I was close,
but in my lifetime, I don't remember seeing this much political will around this issue to make a change this dramatic. So I hope it's going to stick this time. Because I don't know a single person who likes changing the time.
No. I think we all agree that changing the time is bad. The question is, which way do we go?
There's obviously disagreement on which one to land on, and unfortunately, if there's enough gridlock, we might just end up maintaining the status quo. But I think if it really came down to it, I shouldn't say this, I would take permanent daylight savings over keeping the back and forth.
I mean, it's interesting.
It's not what I want, but I would take permanent anything over the current situation, although I would much prefer standard time.
It's kind of interesting because I didn't realize that the status quo. I didn't realize that a bunch of southern states have voted to have permanent daylight savings and are prohibited from doing that by the terms of the 1974 law.
I think we mentioned that in the episode. It's been about 6 months since we did it. I think we talked about like Seattle or Washington State, I believe, also has, like, several states have passed legislation, but none of them can enact it until it's approved federally.
Yeah.
So wait, actually, what kind of can of worms does that open where, I mean, I assume the federal government dictates what happens, right? Like
the federal government's going to dictate what happens, presumably. Like the fourth option is that they could say, okay, states' rights. Every state decides what they're going to do themselves.
That's the true nightmare scenario that I was about to bring up. Is that a possibility where different states pass different legislation on their own, and like then you have to figure out time zones by state as well as by time zone.
I mean, that opens a real like an administrative can of worms is what I would call that. So let's hope that doesn't happen. I don't know. We'll see. I think we're going to. I mean, I think we'll know more about this in the next couple of weeks. Like the next of the positive windows for this to happen, for this legislation to pass the House isn't until November when the time falls back again. And obviously that's like a week before the election, and it's while they're in recess. So it's not going to happen then.
Also, of the two, the one in the fall is the one people actually like because they get more sleep, right?
They get an extra hour of sleep.
The one that we just passed is the absolute nadir of enthusiasm around this whole model. And so yeah, people are not as crotchety in November about it because they get more sleep instead of less.
And I think we talk about this in the episode a little bit, but like the basic idea, the problem with daylight savings time is that most people's circadian rhythms are really tied to sunrise, and that seeing the sunlight at the start of the day is what starts a lot of things like cortisone and hormone production and all sorts of stuff like that makes that is important. It turns out, theoretically, at least, for keeping us healthy. We get into the science, and there's a bunch of studies and all that stuff in the episode. So yeah. I think that's as good a place as any to kick it off, probably. Make sure if you listen to the episode, if you already listened to it, apologies. We'll be back next week, either with a Q&A or an episode about Mac stuff. We're kind of TBD on that. It's normally a Q&A episode week, but we may skip a week and talk about new Apple stuff. Because you're getting a new phone. I want to spend time talking about the watch, because I have a really weird relationship with the watch that I got around Christmas time.
Interesting. So and I just spent my first full week on an M1 Max. So like I've got the whole experience of trying to, track down ARM versions of applications. And like, I think there's interesting stuff around, the mess that 5G and millimeter wave have become, apparently, that I was not aware of until this iPhone SE announcement. There's a lot of stuff. It's not so much that Apple event that happened, like it was fairly uneventful, but like I think there's a lot of stuff around like their M1 and M2 roadmap for their ARM CPUs and like this 5G stuff. And there's a lot of tangential topics that might be interesting to cover there.
So that'll be next week. Make sure you stick around for the question from the chronobiologist, the question and further comment from the chronobiologist, because it was really interesting and I learned a lot from that. Yeah. And thanks everybody for listening. Here's the daylight savings. Here's I think we called it Welcome to Manhattanhenge.
Yes, Manhattan. I would still like to see Manhattanhenge sometime.
I mean, look, we can go to New York this year if we want. Welcome to Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod. I'm Will.
I'm Brad. Hello.
That was a cheery way to start a show.
Yeah. I didn't expect you to go straight to get small group off world to preserve the species.
There was a Disney. Do you remember like the Disney Sunday night movie that used to be on ABC when we were kids?
Yeah.
Like sometimes it would be like Benji or some dog thing, like The Incredible Journey or something. But one like 2 or 3 week period, they had a like 6-hour movie that was about these kids that got launched on a spaceship that went like slightly faster than the speed of light. And they were going to another, it was like a big, it was kind of a weird hard sci-fi thing for TV in the 80s. And like, I remember two things about it. One is that I think the ship could come apart in a fun, interesting way that was like all effectsy and like good model shots. And the other was that the kids were teenagers and there was only one adult on the ship. So it sounded pretty good. And they didn't address the inherent horniness of the situation at all.
It was the Disney Sunday night movie. Come on.
Yeah. But the kids got to a point where they caught up with radio waves emanating from the earth. And they were like, oh man, I love this song. And they changed the course of the ship to follow the songs that they wanted to hear.
That is the most teenager thing.
Yeah, it cracked me up.
Except for the part where teenagers in the 80s, or like, who knows when this was set, but the part where modern teenagers wanted to listen to popular music from the 1930s. I don't know.
The kids always like old stuff. Like I remember when I was in high school, like 70s, like Led Zeppelin and Eagles and all that stuff was popular again. It'd come back around.
That had gotten into the squarely like classic rock, retro kind of cool.
Yeah, but like there was a retro cool rock at that point, which was like late 60s, early 70s, Beatles to probably pre-disco, right?
Yeah, okay. But I mean, 80 to 90-year-old popular music, I don't know.
Well, I mean, I don't know. People listen to blues.
Yeah, okay, fair.
You listen to Hound Dog. You listen to the horny 45s of the 1940s.
The horny 45s.
Yeah. This is a real, I've said horny twice in this episode, 3 times now. This is a dangerous trend.
Well, okay. That's a perfect segue into the horniest topic imaginable.
Yeah.
Daylight savings time.
This was a suggestion from a listener.
Uh-huh. Yes.
I think it was, it turned out to be fascinating.
Yeah. There's a lot here. There's a lot here that I didn't know. There was some stuff here that I thought I knew and did, in fact, know. What am I saying? Let's talk about it.
There's a lot of myths. There's a lot of daylight saving times myths. There's a lot of fun. Like there's one story that is widely quoted that Ben Franklin satirically suggested people could save money on candles by setting their clocks forward 1 hour so that they get more light in the evening when they were burning the most candles. And he even did an analysis that showed that France would save as much as, well, current day $200 million every year on candle and whale oil costs, presumably. I don't know how they knew it was satirical.
I was going to say, old Ben Franklin, truly the Jonathan Swift of his age. Although, wait, when was Jonathan Swift?
If you want to talk about who the horniest of our founding fathers was, it's definitely Ben Franklin.
Also, actually, they were almost contemporary, to be fair.
They would have been, yeah. Well, Ben Franklin probably died when Jonathan Swift was a kid, would be my guess. Because Jonathan Swift was like late 1800s, right?
No.
Oh, really?
Late 1600s.
Oh.
He died 1745, so they may have been alive. They were alive at the same time for a bit, let's say.
I didn't know that satirical cannibalism was so popular in the 1600s.
Oh man, we went into this with an episode title in mind, but we just keep busting them out.
Look, if I only sleep 3 or 4 hours a night, I'm real good on titles and not much good on anything else.
Dude, that is a whole other episode I would like to do if we somehow could find the expertise to do it. I also find that I am weirdly punchier and almost like sharper when I'm sleep deprived.
It's because your filters are bad.
Is that what it is? Maybe my own self-judgment also suffers.
Yeah, like my shame goes way down and my ability to just say things without thinking about them at all goes way up.
Okay.
But it's the secret of extra life.
But my ability to judge the quality of what I'm saying also declines.
Yeah, well, here we are. And welcome to the show, everybody.
Yeah. Anyway, at the time of this recording, we are to do 16-ish hours away from the clocks changing.
Whoa.
Time is ticking, man.
What's your strategy? You go around the house to like turning needles. You let everything just stay its course. Do you change? Like, do you have a clock that you always find like 3 weeks later that hasn't been changed yet?
No, I pretty much I find it weirdly satisfying changing all the clocks, and I pretty much get up like almost the second I get out of bed on the day. I get up and just go around the house and do all of them. But how many clocks do you even have in the house that need changing? We have this run of show and we're leapfrogging to the end here.
Well, look, let's freestyle this one.
It's a chatty episode. I mean, how many clocks do you even have around the house that need changing? Because like so many of the things we use for timekeeping automate daylight savings now, like all the mobile devices, all the computers, all the consoles, like with the possible exception of Windows 10, which I find very bad about handling daylight savings.
Well, I'll tell you how Windows 11 does next week. We have one wall clock that's a wind-up clock that we don't ever use because the house is so small that you can hear the ticking in every corner of the house, and it makes us a little crazy.
You mean a literal wind-up clock, not a battery-operated that ticks, like a literal gears, like gears and springs?
Wound up with weights and the whole thing.
Oh, wow.
It was one of my grandfather's clocks.
Oh, so it's the
one on the wall in the dining room. You've seen it.
Yeah.
I think it's a repro. It's not a real one, but it's like an old repro at this point. So
that makes it antique by default.
Probably not, but the mechanism was definitely made in a factory in the 50s. Probably would be my guess. Anyway, the only clock that we have that I think that needs to be manually updated at this point is the one that's on the microwave oven. Because when we got the stove, it's connected to the internet now and it changes automatically.
What? Are you kidding?
Look, man,
the stove updates its own clock.
I'm going to go and tell you, it's hard to buy a nice stove that isn't internet connected.
Wait, so, I mean, we live in an apartment with a landlord who is loath to ever replace anything. So I have no sense of what appliances are like these days. But like, is it really at that point where like the last time I paid attention to internet connected appliances, they seemed like a completely ridiculous extravagance, but did it just happen? Like, are they all that way now?
Well, so, okay, usually there's a really cheap tier of stuff that's not connected.
Okay.
But like on a stove, we wanted to get a high BTU burner and we wanted to get a griddle burner. And it didn't make sense. So stoves are weird because there's two different ranges. There's like normal consumer stuff, and then there's like the chef style for fancy houses. You don't usually want to put the chef style for fancy houses in a bad house because it's like it's not, it's like too expensive for the house and you won't see your money back. So we didn't want to buy like a Viking. We didn't have 10 grand to spend on a Viking, but we didn't want to buy like a Viking or a Wolf or a Sub-Zero or something like that. And those are all staunchly mechanical. The expensive ones have no electronic shit in them at all, so they last forever.
That rules.
Yeah, it's fucking awesome. Like at some point I will buy one of those, but it wasn't for this house. We ended up buying a big Samsung gas range, and it actually has a high BTU wok burner, which is something you can get in California a lot because there's a lot of Asian families that do cooking at home.
I have experienced some backyard wok cooking before, and that flame is intense.
Yeah, this one was like a 25,000 BTU wok burner, and it's awesome. Like it is so like you can heat stuff up in so little time. It's fabulous. But in order to get that, we had to like it was like a mid-range, mid high, I guess, price range, and all of those are internet connected at this point. Which is stupid because you still have to like press the button to queue it up and tell it to wait for the internet connection so that somebody just can't hack your stuff and turn it on remotely. And also, I think when the power went out and it reset a few years ago, I maybe never connected it back to the Wi-Fi. So
nice. Well, now you have to change that clock manually.
Yeah, probably.
What else do you get out of the stove being internet connected besides the clock changing?
You can turn the oven on like with your phone. So like if you put, say, a roast in the oven when you leave for work, the theory is when you put a roast in the oven when you leave for work in the morning, you can turn it on at like 2:00 and it'll be exactly right when you get home at 5.
Interesting.
In reality, cool. I'm never ever going to do that.
I don't know that I want to leave the roast just out.
Well, I think you freeze it a little bit first or something. It's probably, it's fine enough for a few hours. It'll be okay.
Sure.
I wanted to like get data. I wanted to know like how much gas was going through at any given moment, but it doesn't do any of that.
Oh, that would be great. That'd be cool. Boy, this is getting way off topic. Have you paid much attention to the recent safety concern around gas ranges?
The carbon monoxide stuff?
Yeah.
Yeah, we have carbon monoxide sensors all through the house, so I'm okay with it.
Okay.
Also, our house is real leaky, so we're probably fine.
Helps you cycle the air.
I just have a low-grade headache, and I'm kind of tired all the time, but it seems okay. It was a little, I'll tell you, we have carbon monoxide sensors and carbon dioxide sensors in the house. When it was hot a couple of years ago during fire season and we had to leave the windows closed all the time because of all the smoke, it was a little concerning how high the carbon, like we would see like 1600 ppms of carbon dioxide in the house after a few days. And we would have to like mask up and open the windows and air it out and then turn on the air filters really high and take the masks off after a while. California sucks.
All right.
But daylight savings time, Brad.
Yeah.
The car clock is the one that I always forget. Because that one doesn't update automatically.
Interesting.
And
even your new one?
I don't know. I haven't had it for daylight savings time yet, I guess. We got it after.
Find out tomorrow.
Yeah. Maybe it's on the Wi-Fi.
Yeah, we've got like 3 analog wall clocks, the stove and the microwave. I've got a clock radio alarm clock.
Okay. Wow.
And I think that's about it around here. But I don't know what it is. I just find it pretty satisfying to go around. It's just like a fun little twice a year chore ritual.
You like the ritual?
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah. It's delighting in the mundane details of life is a good way to get through, I find. Should we
start with some myths?
Yeah. So I'd kind of jotted down some stuff I had heard over the years, which is, here's the first thing I wrote here was, I've always heard daylight savings time began as a World War thing. I think World War I. And then we went and researched some of the history. And indeed, it did officially begin for the first time during World War I.
Well, that's when it got popular. It actually began in Canada in like 1908.
That's fair.
It was the first place that tried it in, I think, Newfoundland.
You know what? I am guilty here. I did not note the couple of like Canadian cities that adopted it first. They should get the credit, I suppose.
Canada was a thought leader on daylight savings time.
Yes.
Thanks, Canada.
Yes.
Yeah, they did it as like an energy production thing in World War II. So you'd have to use less coal and stuff to heat your houses because theoretically you'd stay up. the sun would be up later, and then you'd go to bed.
This literally says here, conserving coal during wartime was the first time. So Germany and Austria-Hungary during World War I were the first countries to officially make it nationwide.
So efficient. The World War II reasoning in the UK, at least, was different. So they were getting bombed by the Germans fairly regularly, and as a result, they had my grandmother told me stories about this when I was a kid because she grew up in England in the war, and they would. Like if you had cars, you had to shutter the lights so the light only pointed in a tiny pool down just in front of the car. Street lights, all your windows had to be blacked out. Everything was blacked out, and like there were wardens who would walk around from house to house if you had light showing, because the German bombers would fly over at night and they'd look for light sources and just huck a bomb or two at the light sources.
Wow.
So like if your neighbor left their look, imagine if not wearing a mask in America today resulted in Germans bombing you.
I was going to say, this is such a sign of the times that before you even said that, all I was sitting here thinking was about the current like lack of cohesion, social cohesion about mask mandates. Like it immediately made me think, wonder what life would be like in this country right now if we were trying not to get bombed.
Yeah. So like a person or two in every neighborhood would do the walk every night, and they'd call out, let people know if there were shutters were showing. You'd get like yelled at by the government if you had too much light coming through. And they did double daylight savings time in World War II in the UK, British double summertime, or BDST.
British double summertime.
So
that's a cool phrase.
Basically 1 year they didn't fall back, and then the next year they sprung forward again.
Huh.
So effectively at like 10 o'clock at night in the summer, 11 o'clock at night in summer, sometimes it would be still sunny out.
Wow.
So you'd have plenty of time to like get home, do all the stuff you needed to do before the lights turned out, and you had to turn off all the lights and shutter all your windows and all that stuff. So
that's wild to think about from a historical perspective. Like I am a gigantic nerd for World War II era history of all stripes, but like when you put it that way, that they had multiple summers in which to like keep leapfrogging their daylight savings time, like it really makes you realize what an absolute grind that must have been to live through, even as a civilian.
Well, the other thing that she told me is that in London, they took all of, and most of the UK, they took all of the street signs down so that when the Germans invaded, they'd have a hard time knowing where they were.
Wow.
So like basically they inconvenienced the shit out of the entire population on the off chance the Germans were going to invade.
Oh, Operation Sea Lion was just a pipe dream. Everybody knows that.
Anyway, well, they didn't know it at the time.
No, I suppose not.
But they often would find like a GIs walking around completely lost, and you'd have to like, yeah.
You know what? I'm not going to begrudge anything that anybody did to try to get by in the course of that war.
Yeah, no, good going. Nice job, everybody.
Yeah. So real quick, just to kind of fill out the history a little bit here, it looks like it was retired after World War I. There was kind of a big intermission, and it didn't come back until World War II. And then maybe you're almost old enough to remember this. It looks like it maybe fell off again after World War II, and it was only in the 70s when it really became like a true institution here.
It wasn't
correct?
Federally legislated until the
energy crisis in the 70s.
Energy crisis,
right.
Yeah.
So I've never known a time without it, so I just assumed it had been around for like a century or something, but it seems a little spottier than that.
Well, the weird thing is before, let's see, I wrote it down here, before the Universal Time Act, which was the thing that changed this in the 70s. There was one in the 60s and one in the 70s, I think. The way we did time in the United States, at least, was pretty chaotic. Like towns and cities would maintain their own time standards.
I had no idea about this. This sounds completely ludicrous.
Yeah. So like if you were driving from Asheville to Johnson City, over the mountain, 45 minutes, if you might have to change your watch by like 20 minutes in the course of that journey because Johnson City's clock was bad.
You might get there before you left.
Yeah, like, look, you could have all sorts of. If you weren't careful, you could end up being your own grandfather, Brad.
Jeez.
Yeah. Well, and some cities would do daylight savings time. Some counties would. Some states would. Some places just didn't. And so the Universal Time Act said, "Hey, here's the standard. Here's the time zones. We mostly agree to these now, but for the most part, we're going to stick to this." And also, states can opt out of daylight savings time, but they can't opt in. For year round. Okay. So like Arizona and bits and pieces of Indiana, and I think for a while Montana or Michigan didn't buy into daylight savings time. Now Michigan eventually got on board. Indianapolis is still Eastern time while the rest of the state's Central time. or still doesn't do daylight savings time. Or I can't. Indianapolis is weird. Just don't go to Indianapolis. Sorry, Indianapolis.
Boy.
Arizona doesn't do it because keeping the lights on later raises energy costs is their argument. So, and we can talk about this in the myths and apocrypha category, but like one of the ideas of daylight savings time is that, hey, the lights are out later, you don't have to use as much energy, but that made a lot of sense when like most of our energy use was for lighting. But once our energy use shifted from lighting to cooling and heat, it stopped making as much sense because it's way more expensive to cool a place than it is to turn on a light bulb.
Yeah.
And so Arizona doesn't do daylight savings time. Also, Arizona's always has to be weird because it's fucking Arizona. So
sure, but
they're special.
No offense to them.
They're like the West Texas.
Yeah, that helps clarify things because a bunch of states have either passed or at least entertained bills that would make daylight savings time permanent. But that can't go into effect unless Congress federally passes a law. And so that got me wondering, like, well, wait, how does Arizona opt out? But apparently you can opt out, but you cannot opt into permanent without federal say so.
Yeah. So the first time they passed the law, they said you couldn't opt out unless you did it as a whole state, which Arizona did. The second time they said you could opt out as a portion of a state, but only based on the existing time zone lines. So like Tennessee, which is like the part from Knoxville east is basically Eastern time, and the part from the west side of Knoxville west is Central time. If Tennessee wanted to say, okay, Western Tennessee is not going to opt into daylight savings time, but Eastern Tennessee is, they totally could. Yeah, it's weird. And something like 19 or 20 states have said, hey, we would do permanent daylight savings time if the feds let us.
No, thank you. No, I'm good.
Oh, I like daylight savings time.
I don't
really?
I mean, I appreciate it for when it's in effect. I don't think I would want it all. I don't know, man. I'm torn. I'm very torn.
I like the late sun. I don't like being up in the morning. Okay. Well, anyway, we should get into we're all over the place today,
dude. We have all these bullet points here and we are not following them. I'm wrapping my rule book here.
No. Okay. You bust out your gavel, Brad.
Let's see.
You want to bounce back to the myths and apocrypha?
Well, so there is kind of an argument for doing away with it. I don't know if we want to get into that now or if that's an end of episode thing.
Let's do 4 pros and cons at the end.
Okay. I mean, something I wrote down here, this was kind of an aside that occurred to me as we were planning this episode, but like, I don't know about you, but I have had a really interesting experience of time over the last 18 months.
Because you like everything's the same every day?
Literally because of being in this westward facing apartment almost 24/7 for like 18 months, right?
Yeah.
Like in my working life, I've never had an experience of that because I mean, you're basically the same, right? Like unless you work from home permanently, which most people don't.
I have for the last 5 years.
Well, that's fair. That's
6 years.
But you know, you're commuting to and from places, you're seeing different things at different times of day. It's hard to you don't have like a standard candle, let's say. Like you don't have
never had much of a schedule.
You don't have a standard frame, like physical, like locational frame of reference for how time changes over the course of the year, right? But like our living room faces directly west out toward the ocean. And, you know, so we've got a consistent skyline.
Mm-hmm.
Like I've become really acutely aware over the work from home of like how daylight lengthens and shortens as the year progresses, the angle of the sun, because I've got this, you know, I've got all these other apartment buildings out the window. I can it's almost like a sundial, you know, for the year where it's like, wow, the sun was way over there to the right in June and now it's way over here to the left.
Well, being able to see where, like, because we're further north, the sun goes further up and down the coast when it's setting.
Yeah.
But yeah, being able to see that west facing sunset and know that like in the summer, it's going to set 30 degrees to the right of where it sets in the wintertime.
Right.
Is crazy.
It's you know, like obviously like we all learn about the axial tilt of the planet growing up and stuff like that. Like, you know, these things scientifically, but you don't really like my commute schedule. My work schedule was such that like a good chunk of the year I got home after it was dark. Right. So I just didn't see that. But like tracking that every day for a year and a half has been kind of really cool and eye opening.
So we've lived in this house for 14 years now. And as a result, like when I started doing the home automation stuff, I got the first taste of this because I was like, why is it always dark in the living room in the wintertime or in the summertime earlier than it is in the wintertime? That doesn't make any sense. But it's because our windows face south, and in the wintertime, and also there's a mountain that covers like 2/3 of the south and a little tiny bit of the west. Yeah. Right. So the sun goes down way, 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 way earlier in the wintertime, and way, 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 way. And even though it goes up down later, we don't get as much direct light in because the sun's further around to the north in the summertime.
That's really rough. Actually, being in this apartment, I mean, San Francisco, at least this part of the city, is on a grid that directly is kind of perpendicular to the coastline. So you get that nice east-west, but like living in here, I'm sure, if you're buying a house, you don't have a lot of choice in this regard, but like I would love to keep living in this like rigidly east-west facing situation for the rest of my life, because getting these sunsets and sunrises on either end of the domicile is pretty nice.
It's funny because like the realtors will tell you that having a south-facing exposure is more desirable because you get more even sun throughout the day. But I tend to agree with you when you're someplace that you actually have good sunsets and like ocean and stuff.
Just from a kind of relaxation standpoint, like sitting in the living room and seeing a nice sunset is nice. But also it avoids the problem you were talking about of like, even as the angle changes throughout the year, like we're still west facing enough that we still get enough direct light through in the afternoons, regardless of which side it's on. But it sounds like you guys are just missing out.
Well, the weird thing is, like, there's really good, like the axial tilt is easy to programmatically account for in like the home automation stuff. But the fact that there's a mountain over like half of the southern exposure is impossible. I just have to change the time offset every few months, every few weeks during the wintertime until the lights turn on at the right time, basically.
Right. Because they're not giving you sunset data with that level of precision.
Yeah, exactly. So anyway,
is there anything in Home Assistant? I generally don't touch I set it up a couple years ago, early last year, and have not really touched anything. But is there anything I should go look at in there that I could mess with in terms of like, I should change the sunset offset on these lights coming on by 20 minutes or something?
Well, so I usually err on the earlier side than the later side because it's better to be light early than dark late. So what I should do is write a script that just changes it every 10 minutes, like by a minute every day.
I'm gonna write a script, huh? Now we're talking.
Yeah, I don't know. That seems like a lot of work, though. But it's interesting, the intersection of human construction and like the sun, because there's a couple of days a year. This is a weird, incredibly specific to my living room. There's a couple of days a year where my front door is perfectly aligned with the sun, such that the peephole on my front door focuses a circle that's about 3 inches around on the wall opposite the peephole.
Wow.
And it happens usually for 2 or 3 days on either side of each equinox, I believe.
Okay.
Equinox. Yeah. And so the equinox is when we're
halfway.
The days are most even. Right. We're halfway around.
We're halfway between the longest and the shortest day of the year. Right?
Exactly.
And those are the solstice?
Spring. No, equinox is the summer and is the fall and spring.
No, I mean the longest and shortest days are the
longest and shortest are the solstices.
Solstices, right?
Yeah.
Which ones? There's a vernal equinox, right?
Vernal is autumn.
What's the other one? Can you name them all? That's the only one I can come up with.
Well, summer solstice and winter solstice and vernal equinox and
those are just summer,
I don't remember
winter.
what the spring one's called.
I
think vernal, summer, spring, fall, maybe vernal spring. I can't remember.
Vernal. Let's see. In the it varies by hemisphere.
Of course, yeah.
In the northern hemisphere, the March equinox is the vernal or spring equinox.
Oh,
while the September equinox is called the autumnal or fall equinox.
Oh, well,
and
that's less impressive.
Yes, and it's the reverse in the southern.
So there's other famous examples of this intersection of human construction and
can I stop you real quick before you get into that? Because I want to hear this word because it's the actual title of the episode. But B, with your peephole focusing the light, are we talking a focusing as of a magnifying glass, like you could fry stuff? That
was my initial concern when I saw this happen the first time. But no, it is like a 3 or 4 inch circle. So it's fine.
Okay.
I tried putting a piece of paper and running it along the entire length of the hole, and the peephole does not focus it in such a way that it will light things on fire at the focal range that is extant inside my house, sadly.
Okay.
I think next time I might put a magnifying glass in front of it, though.
You should do that. You should definitely do that.
What could go wrong?
Sorry, go ahead. Say the word.
Okay, so have you heard of Manhattanhenge?
I had not until 5 minutes before this podcast, and you said it, and then I started to Google pictures of it, and you were like, "No, stop," because it looked cool.
So Manhattanhenge happens because Manhattan is aligned on a grid. The streets all line up with each other perfectly. So 2 days a year, the sun lines up, the setting or rising sun lines up with the grid of the city, and as a result, the light shines directly down each column the cross streets are totally dark. I mean, not totally dark, but like the incidental light bounces around, but like
as in shadow as they could get.
As in shadow as they can get. And it's like the prehistoric observatory effect with Stonehenge or the temples in Central America and stuff like that.
That's so cool.
But on the scale of Manhattan.
If you've not seen this, I'm sure photos don't do it justice, but you can Google a bunch of photos and it looks cool as hell.
I missed it by like 3 days one year and was super. Had I known, I would have just stayed.
Oh man, I just found an article on farmersalmanac.com called "Here Comes Manhattanhenge 2021 Dates."
Yep. There's another place, the Infinite Corridor at MIT. This is an incredibly long corridor that runs east-west at MIT. And there's a couple of days in the late winter and early spring, or like just November and January on either side of the winter solstice, where it lines up with the sun. And when they open doors on one end, the sun just shines straight through all the way to the other end.
Was that engineered, or being that it's MIT, or was that just an accident? Do you know?
I mean, I think probably the fact that it lined up is probably an accident, but I don't know for sure. So it happens. I'd be curious I'm sure there's others that people know about. Any city that's on a grid, theoretically, this would happen for if there's east-west facing streets. And yeah, if you have trouble understanding why the axial tilt changes this, the thing I would recommend is to like get a foam ball and stick a couple of toothpicks in it so you can hold it on an axis and then get another ball and literally move it around the sun, and you'll see.
Or a light bulb.
Light bulb would work. Yeah. You can see, you can see how because remember, you rotate all the time, but the axial tilt is static all the way around. So on the summer half of the year, your hemisphere faces directly toward the sun. And as a result, the sun is going to be lower, like more toward the south. In the winter part of the year, it's going to look like it's further north because it's further. I have that backwards. It depends on which hemisphere you're at.
Yeah, but you're right. It's very easy to visualize when you do that little miniature experiment. But like that was one thing I had glossed over, is that the farther north.
Yeah.
Farther is for physical distances. I always get it backwards.
Really? I didn't know that one.
Yes. Farther is for physical distances. Further is for abstract distances.
Fascinating.
Such as further forward in time, let's say. We will discuss this further.
Did we talk about the entropy in clocks a few weeks ago?
Yes.
On the show, or did we just talk about that out of the show?
I started to say yes, but maybe not. I think we did.
I feel like it was a cold open, maybe.
It was the kind of the landmark thermodynamic equations about clocks.
The fact that you can't perfectly measure time without infinite entropy.
Yes. I think we got into that.
Pros and cons of measuring time precisely, it turns out.
Anyway, I was going to say, I was reminded as I was looking through some of these articles out there about like, should we go permanent DST? Should we abolish it altogether? That like, that's, if you hate these changes, the best thing you can do is move as close to the equator as possible.
Yeah. Yeah. Because
like Hawaii, for example, is a great place to be if you want like early light and late light.
Well, and yeah, you get also the variation throughout the year changes less the closer you are to the equator. And once you get inside the tropics, the Tropic of Capricorn and the Tropic of Cancer, then you get minimal variation at all, because you're basically getting full sun all the time.
And also, I'm sitting here smacking my forehead right now for even having forgotten about that stuff, because you always hear about like Scandinavian countries and Alaska and places like that, like having just god awful amounts of darkness in the winter.
Well, and so the Arctic Circle and the Antarctic Circle are the hey, you're going to have a bad time in the winter circles. Yes. Those are the ones that indicate that you won't see any sun for some period of time.
If you're prone to seasonal affective disorder. I'm sorry, seasonal affective disorder. If you're prone to that, maybe don't go there.
Yeah. So okay, there's myths. There's more myths. There's a lot of myths. My favorite is that the day after springing forward, the Monday after springing forward, is the most dangerous day of the year to drive. Do you think it's true or false?
My gut feeling is that there's maybe some kernel of truth there, but that it's also a little overblown. Like I know, obviously sleep deprivation and all that stuff, but an hour doesn't seem like it should make that much difference.
So there have been a handful of studies about jet lag and driving safety. And most of them agree that if you drive with mild jet lag, which is basically what you're doing on spring forward Monday, or sleepy Monday is what these people call it, then you are more likely to have accidents. So basically what you're doing is getting in a car on the day that everybody's a little bit jet lagged and you're trucking to work when everybody's still a little sleepy, maybe hasn't had enough coffee yet. And there've been a bunch of studies about this and they've been kind of all over the place. So Minnesota roundup of the studies, basically said, hey, we found 10 studies we validated that are for the theory that this is a more dangerous day to drive, and 6 that were against. However, the thing that none of these studies take into account is that when there's more light late in the day, when people are still driving, the roads are definitely safer. Like pushing twilight back an extra hour so that it happens at 8:30 or 9 instead of 7:30 or 8 seems to have a much greater effect, to the point that like doing year-round daylight savings would probably save at least a couple of hundred lives a year in the United States on traffic fatalities.
Damn it.
Because of the reduced danger driving when it's light out.
I was all ready to come in here and argue for getting rid of it altogether, and now you have to throw out the saving human life part, and now I'm just going to be the asshole.
Brad, if you want to kill 200 people every year,
damn it,
you can get your morning light.
This is a low blow. This is a low blow. Okay.
Now hold on. There's more. The other side of it is that there's been some Scottish studies that they did in the 80s when they were trying to do year-round daylight, or 90s when they were trying to do year-round daylight savings in the UK, that showed that when they did this, they did a 3-year trial at some point in the 70s or early 80s. And there were a lot more morning traffic accidents involving school children going to school early in the dark. So probably those 200 fatalities that you save at night are completely canceled out by the kids that get hit by cars in the morning on the way to school.
Now who has the moral high ground?
It's complicated.
Now we're saving children's lives.
Now the counter to this is that let the kids go to school later. They don't have to go to school at 7 o'clock in the morning. Let them go at 9:30 when the sun's up.
Damn rule benders.
Yeah. Anyway, there's another good one about heart attacks. So heart attack rate increases are tied to daylight savings time. There've been some studies about this, the kind of stuff you see on like the Today Show in the morning. And as many like a 24% increase in emergency room visits for heart attacks on the days after daylight savings time.
So that one does surprise me because like driving, there's an element of like control,
Yeah.
Like there's some awareness and you can like mitigate by being extra alert or whatever, drink more coffee. But like heart attacks, obviously you can't control whether you have a heart attack or not, but I wouldn't think an hour would make that big a difference for like cardiac issues.
Well, so one of the things that there isn't a lot of study on this. I looked for some stuff and I didn't find anything that jumped out as super reputable. The one thing that I did see said that basically the theory here is that there is a strong correlation between disrupting your sleep patterns and chances of cardiac events. So because you're having a nationwide sleep pattern change happening there, probably that's what is the trigger. Like it's not the springing forward or falling back. It's that everybody's losing an hour of sleep, which I mean, I guess those two things are directly connected because of daylight savings time. However, it's nothing inherent. Like if we went, it's not because the sun is staying up later. It's because we're changing the time. If we stop changing the time, that would presumably stop happening.
Sure. I suspect what I'm actually doing here is minimizing the amount of sleep disruption. Like it's probably not just the hour that you technically lose, because people probably have a harder time getting to sleep on subsequent nights because of the just jet laggy effects and stuff.
Well, and you're getting up earlier. You know, it's like that feeling you get when you wake up and you have to get up. You got to put like 4 o'clock in the morning to go get on an airplane or something. You know,
right.
It's not.
Yeah. Like what I'm saying is, I bet the cumulative sleep loss is actually a good bit more than that 1 hour.
Yeah. Oh, definitely. So yeah, those were the big ones. Farmers hate daylight savings time, it turns out.
So really? So
yeah,
the thing I was going to say, that was one of the myths I didn't write down here, but I had like through childhood, I had always heard it was an agricultural thing that started it. It was like, oh, they wanted more daylight in the evenings to harvest or blah, blah, blah. But like, no, it was fully a wartime thing and a corporate thing, looking at these bullet points.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, and look, there is a convenience. There is a measured benefit to like outdoor recreation being able to happen outside of work in the evening for longer in the year. And like, I don't think anybody's going to argue that going outside more is bad for you.
No, absolutely not.
So sure. Like if you can go out and go for a walk in the dark, I mean, you can go out and go for a walk in the dark. Where I live, I might get eaten by a mountain lion if I do that. But like, like if you go out, if you have more sun, then you might be more likely to go out and go for a walk. And that's probably a net win.
You're not wrong, but hey, what if instead of moving time and clocks and stuff all over the place, what if we just didn't require people to be so goddamn busy for the entirety of the daylight cycle?
Man, like
what if people just had time to go exercise in the middle of the day?
Gina and I were talking about this. Like, this is a total aside, but like she had to take our daughter to get vaccinated. Like, we're starting to have busy days again between school and after school activities and stuff like that. It is not great. Like, being busy all the time sucks.
Yeah. It's not a good way to live. You know what?
No.
I have come to the realization more and more over time that you only get one life, and it would be cool if you didn't spend the entire thing
overbooking is bad.
Doing that. Yes.
Yeah, exactly.
You know, maybe if the general workforce had a little more flexibility, they might all be happier and more productive and less likely to be very angry all the time.
Yeah, that's a nice thought.
I don't know. Anyway.
I got a daylight savings factoid. I thought this one was fake, but it turns out it's true.
Go on.
The 2007 extension that added, daylight savings time used to be the last Sunday in March to the last Sunday in October.
Oh, there was a specific extension. I never noticed that, but that's one of the things I thought coming into this was like, it used to seem like it was like less of the year, and it just kind of creeps more and more across the year as time goes on.
Well, so they moved it up to the first Sunday in November, I think, or first Sunday in November, which is this, today for listeners. And that happened in 2007.
Okay.
I don't know that the candy industry was the driver, but they strongly supported this because they wanted Halloween to take place inside the confines of daylight savings time.
They sure did.
It's probably safer too. Fewer kids going to get run over by cars if it's not pitch black out.
Just as Mother's Day is such a greeting card holiday.
Yeah.
Daylight savings is such a candy industry holiday.
The tree lobby should come out against Mother's Day. Look, okay, hold on. I take that back. I apologize for saying anything bad about Mother's Day.
I've got nothing against Mother's Day.
No one should come after Mother's Day. Mother's Day is great. We all love Mother's Day. We support mothers.
I was being mildly flip.
Yes. I don't want the Mother's Day lobby to come after us, Brad. We can't take that kind of heat.
No. So yeah, let's see. I think that pretty much brings us up to the present. 2007 was like the last major change, right?
Seems like it. There's been constant, there's been kind of movement on the year-round daylight savings time front, though. Although I do think if we do that, we'll have to, school in the United States is fraught because for a pretty significant portion of the population, as we learned in the last year, school is synonymous with daycare for their children. For a lot of people here. Mm-hmm. So like if the sun starts coming up later, then we got to push school start times back so that people don't get hit by cars and I don't know. It's complicated.
Yeah. So I think the last thing to talk about here is this Bloomberg story you sent me from 2015.
Yeah.
Makes a pretty strong case for just getting rid of daylight savings time.
Yes. Just stay permanent daylight savings time all the time. Exactly.
Nope. Getting rid of it as in it doesn't exist anymore.
Yep. We just spring forward once and then never fall back.
Nope. Like we're on the time that God intended, which is not daylight savings time. The title of the story is "The Maps That Prove the Daylight Saving Cycle is Ruining Our Lives."
God couldn't build a clock, Brad.
No, apparently not. The story cites a lot of the same statistics you did about it no longer reduces electric demand like it used to, messes up sleep schedules. Like they cite $400 million in economic losses a year.
I'm incredibly skeptical of those numbers, just for the record.
To the traffic accidents, heart attacks, seasonal affective, et cetera, et cetera. But the actual basis, I'll put the link for this story in the show notes. Are you familiar? I'm not familiar with a group called Access Maps, but one of their cartographers, Andy Woodruff, produced some maps about daylight savings time. Does Access Maps mean anything to you?
No.
I should have maybe.
I worry with that name that they have some sort of unfortunate.
Wait, we're not getting back into World War II stuff, are we?
I hope not.
Maybe I should stop.
Oh no, they're just a map consulting agency.
Yes, they are. So we bring the traditions of cartography to the web. They say. I should have looked them up before I cited this, but I mean, Bloomberg ran it. How untrustworthy could it be?
Oh yeah, Bloomberg's fine. I was thinking about Fortune. Do you think that these are like the people who came on that episode of West Wing? The Big Block of Cheese episode when they come in, they're like, hey, we use the wrong projection for the map. So everything looks, the North states look big and the South states look small.
I've never actually seen The West Wing.
Oh my God. Okay. If you don't need to watch The West Wing to appreciate the Big Block of Cheese episode.
I mean, what are you just talking about? Data being massaged?
Oh God. Okay. I'm going to recap a 20-year-old TV show. Andrew Johnson I don't know. One of the bad Tennessee presidents put a big block of cheese once a year in the White House and people could come in and have a piece of cheese.
Oh, this is historical?
As told through the lens of the West Wing.
Apocryphal?
Yes.
Okay.
Possibly apocryphal.
Okay. Sorkin-ful?
It is a Sorkin-esque. It is a perfect Sorkin story. Like the idea is that you could come and pitch your thing that government should try to address during that one day. Like anybody could come. And so they got a lot. They had a process where they did a bunch of applications every year, and then they would pick the ones. And like some of them are we should get rid of the penny people. Like it's the kooks, Brad. One of them is the remapping people, the people who are like, hey, we use the wrong projection for the map. The one we use is entirely Western centric. It's Northern Hemisphere and Western Hemisphere focused. It's designed to make the places that are small look big so that it looks like the United States and Russia are the two biggest places in the world. And yada, yada, yada. Anyway, it's a good episode. You should watch it. It stands on its own.
Okay. I assume these assertions can be checked. Like I assume other people could produce, peer review this stuff. Okay.
So the thing about the economic losses and spend, it is such a, the daylight savings time shift. It's like the traffic fatalities, right? It's like the traffic accidents. Like if you just look at accidents that happen during the morning commute, yes, it's easy to look at those numbers and make a what seems like a cohesive argument and a full picture. When you look at the overall trend of how many lives are saved during the 8:30 to 9:30 window when it's light, when it wouldn't be all summer long because there aren't traffic accidents, the traffic accident rate is reduced during that time period. It changes the dynamic entirely, and it's really, really complicated.
Of course. I should have been more specific. I'm talking specifically about these maps produced by Andy Woodruff of Axis Maps, because all these maps show is, so he starts out by defining a reasonable sunrise time and a reasonable sunset time. Reasonable sunrises are 7 a.m. or earlier. Reasonable sunset times are 5 p.m. or later. Right?
Who is he to say who the sunrise and sunset time is?
And these are basically United States heat maps. Again, I'll link this. It kind of shows by time zone where in the country, how many days a year you're getting these reasonable sunsets and sunrises based on where you are in different time zones, right? So that could be checked. That's objective data. That's not interpreting traffic fatality statistics and stuff.
Yeah.
But the argument, in fact, not even the argument, what these maps show is that if daylight savings time were abolished, we would be getting basically the same number of reasonable sunsets throughout the year, but we would also be getting way more reasonable sunrises. So essentially, according to his maps, and again, people can look at this and make up their own minds, but according to his maps, we are actually giving up a lot of good early sunlight in the morning for no real gain in number of days with good late sunset times. Also, if you scroll down to the if daylight savings time were always in effect maps, then we have
this one.
Then we have basically 365 days a year of 5 p.m. or later sunsets.
Yeah.
But almost 0 times when the sun is up before 7 a.m.
I'm going to go ahead and tell you, if you're up before 7 a.m. and you want to see some sunrise, get wrecked. I'm a sunset guy through and through. I live by the sunset, die by the sunset, Brad.
Having worked from home for 6 years now, in your case, I'm going to tell you, people who have to get up early and go out the door early to work may have a word or two with you.
Look, I live in an 8 by 10 foot cell, 18 hours a day.
I don't know. As someone who frequently does wake up early, waking up when it's still dark out is kind of gross.
I got to tell you, just stop waking up early. Solve that problem.
I mean, judging purely by these maps, the getting rid of daylight savings time permanently is by far the best compromise position.
But what is a map really, Brad?
Also,
this is one person's bias writ to paper.
This is
propaganda.
Pretty strong argument that daylight savings time is not actually benefiting us much at all.
This Andy Woodruff guy, if that's even really his name, I'm incredibly skeptical.
These maps also make it pretty clear how you are extra getting screwed the farther west. Let's see, I got it. The farther west you are in a time zone.
And the farther north, yeah.
Yeah.
Like if you live in the northwest corner of a time zone, you might as well plan to never see the sun.
Well, at least for sunrises. Like you can see in this heat map, like the farther west you are in a time zone, the worse you get in terms of good sunrise times.
Yeah.
Although this diagonal split in the time zones for sunsets is interesting.
Well, that is specifically because of the change in the angle of incidence in the wintertime of the sun.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure.
I don't know, man.
Yeah.
The secret. So I lived in Nashville for a little while, which is on the east side of a time zone. It was always dark there. I didn't like that. I like living on the west side of a time zone better. In California, where we live on the coast, we're kind of right on the edge of the time zone. It's not great.
Yeah.
I mean, right in the middle, rather.
Yeah. The worst of all worlds.
Maybe we should move to Indiana. Maybe I was wrong about Indiana.
Oh boy,
maybe it's okay.
I don't know that the people of Indianapolis are going to receive you with open arms after what you said, but
I did say some bad. I'm sorry, Indianapolis. I love you. I've been there twice. It was very fun both times.
I bet. What's their specialty? What's the local cuisine?
I don't know, but I didn't order chili and get some weird spaghetti business. So
Wait,
I was
Them?
whatever.
That's not them.
No, that's Ohio.
That's Cincinnati,
I believe.
Cincinnati chili. Hang on. Indianapolis cuisine. Let's finish this one out by talking about food.
Oh boy.
These 10 foods and drinks are beloved in Indianapolis. A tenderloin sandwich.
Ooh, I like a tenderloin. Give me some tendies.
Fried pickles. I mean, fried pickles are not exclusive to
fried pickles are fucking good wherever
Indiana, but fried pickles are pretty good. A sugar cream pie. Ooh, that sounds.
It seems like it might be too sweet.
Square donuts?
What? Okay. Square donuts.
All right, we're done here.
Yeah, shut it down. I'm back on the Indianapolis hate train.
Couldn't you fit more donut in the box if they were square?
Look, if you're talking about maximizing the efficiency of your donut box, then you've already lost. It's already done.
Then you're listening to the Tech Pod.
We got a letter from a chronobiologist, which is a person who studies the biology of time and circadian rhythms and stuff like that.
Oh my God, this is worth reading.
And they asked me not to put their name in, so I'm not going to do that. It's kind of long. As a biologist working in the sleep and circadian rhythms field, I wanted to commend you for not fucking up your daylight savings time episode.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. That was a scary one.
Yeah.
Too many people have overlooked the argument that daylight saving time should be permanently abolished, even though that is by far the consensus position of chronobiologists. I'd wager even more than the man-made CO2 consensus among climate researchers. It looks like that's changing slowly, but hasn't yet reached the awareness of enough legislators in the US or in Canada, where the government is attempting to move to permanent daylight saving, even though the effects would be among the worst possible for a large city like Vancouver. The largest analysis of car accidents following the spring forward transition was published about 2 years ago. It's the one that I referenced. There was an acute increase at both the morning and afternoon driving times, which was more pronounced at the western ends of time zones. I'd be remiss if I didn't point out the acute effects of DST are not the only ones to be concerned about. There's growing evidence of chronic health disturbances from having our social clock be mismatched with the solar time throughout the year. For example, this large-scale epidemiological study found that living on the western end of a time zone increases risk for at least a dozen types of cancer by anywhere from 5 to 10%.
Jeez.
Yeah. One last thing. The best argument against permanent DST may be that Russia moved to permanent DST in 2012, and everyone hated it so much that they moved back after 2 years. If I was a gambling man, I'd say that's likely how many of your northern states would react, especially the ones on the western side of time zones, it seems like. And then I asked a follow-up question because I was like, this is fascinating. How do we get to talk to somebody with this skill set?
Seriously.
And I wanted to know, does this mean we need more time? Does the western edge of the time zone thing being out of sync with the sun mean that we need to shrink and have more time zones to shrink the overall width and ease the pain for the folks on the western edge of existing time zones?
I love it.
And they said, smaller time zones would be one solution. We even have a time zone in Canada that's offset by 30 minutes in Newfoundland. There's also a related issue that the location of some time zones is just stupid relative to the solar day. For example, the western edge of Spain is on the same time as the eastern edge of Poland, even though the difference in sunrise in December is almost 2 hours. So going to work in Spain at 8 a.m. feels like going to work at 6 a.m. in Poland, all other things being equal, which they aren't exactly, but the effect is substantial. I think a more effective general solution would be the thing that you mentioned in the podcast for school kids, which is where you move work obligations to start later in the day or make them more flexible. Moving every 9 to 5 job to a 10 to 6 would also be equivalent to moving the clocks 1 hour in the opposite direction of daylight savings time. But I think it might be harder sell to frame it that way. It's likely low-grade chronic sleep disruption that's causing the deleterious long-term health effects at the western edge of time zones, because people with circadian rhythms that are physiologically predisposed to waking up later in the solar day are being forced to wake up too early to go to work. I'll be interested to see future data about people who've switched to working from home and cut their commute times out of their morning routine and hopefully replace them with better and more sleep. So that's fascinating.
Wow, man.
I thought
those cancer stats are eye-opening. That's
the western side of the time zone. It's like we're in the middle of our time zone, so we're in a good spot here,
sure.
Right? But yeah, like there was a graph of the map of the data, and it's like the northwest corner of time zones was real bad. Like upper Montana mountain time, don't live in northwestern Montana.
Huh.
Anyway,
that stuff's wild.
It's a weird one.
Like that, having heard that email may have like a non-zero effect on any moving plans I may have in the future.
Well, so the other thing is, the further south you are, the less it matters, right?
Sure.
The differences in the day are less pronounced. And also you work at a different, like you and I are pretty insulated from this because we both work from home and we work my office hours are like 10 to 4. And then I usually work a few more hours after that at the end of the day. So like I get up and help my daughter get to school, but then I can go take a nap if I need to, and whatever.
Sure.
I thought it was interesting though.
That is fascinating.
Didn't know that it was a profession until this email came in.
That's one of those that you feel flattered just to have received.
Yeah. We get, it's always nice when we get those. Well, that was a lot of podcast.
It was an amalgamation, let's say, of spanning time zones and months and eras. And
I feel like I learned something along the way. That's the important thing, I think.
Patchwork podcast.
As always, if you enjoy Brad and Will Made a Tech Pod, this is a 100% listener supported show. So we rely on the generosity of patrons like you.
Yes.
To keep the show going. The URL for the Patreon is patreon.com/techpod. Again, that's patreon.com/techpod, where for as little as $2 a month, you can gain access to the Fabulous Tech Pod Discord and have fantastic conversations with, like a bunch of just wonderful human beings. Yeah. I've been talking about Elden Ring a lot the last couple of weeks.
That sounds fun. I was very sad to leave that game behind for a week and a half.
Oh, were you playing on PlayStation?
Yes. I feel like the zeitgeist is passing me by, but
you know what? I just defeated Godric the other day, so I'm just out of the very first area.
Oh, geez. Boy.
We're all going at our own pace, Brad.
This is not helping my sense of FOMO. I just got to Godric right before I left.
I over leveled him and he was pretty easy for me, but that's look, just keep grinding. You'll get there.
Like they went and nerfed the Mimic Tear. Mimic Tear? Mimic Tear?
I thought it was Mimic Tear, but
I have no idea.
Mimic Tear, yeah.
Because I have no idea because I never got it. So they went and nerfed it before I ever even tried it. So
look, there's a bunch of other perfectly. I'm dual wielding flails right now, Brad. It's very exciting.
Wow.
It's the most reckless possible way. Like there's no way an actual person would be able to survive 2 flails, which were bad weapons that no one used in real life anyway.
Until you put them together.
Yeah, put them together. One has 3 heads on it. It's extra dangerous.
Ooh.
You can join the likes of the Fabulous Tech Pod Patreon Discord by going to patreon.com/techpod. And as always, we want to thank our executive producer tier patrons, including Paddle Creek Games, makers of Fractured Veil, Andrew Slosky, Octothorpe Bunny Crimes, Jacob Chappell, Joel Krauska, Measure of a Twinkie. I think that's a reference to Measure of a Man, Twinkle Twinkie's favorite Star Trek episode. David Allen and James Kamek, thank you all so much.
Yes, thank you.
And on that note, I think we'll see everybody next week. Hopefully, Brad, you can get a little bit of sleep and get back on a normal schedule this week.
I am going to try to sleep 9+ hours a night every night until I feel normal again. That's my goal. I'm just no staying up playing video games, no late night snacking, no nothing. Just maybe take a walk in the afternoons and sleep.
Look, I was having trouble sleeping earlier this year. And I was like, you know what? Maybe I shouldn't have a Coke at 10 o'clock at night. That's probably a mistake.
Yeah.
And I stopped doing that. And all of a sudden I was able to go to sleep at a reasonable hour. Who knew?
It's like magic. Yeah. It's like magic.
Weird.
Yeah. Also, new FossPod out.
Yeah, new FossPod is out this week. That's we should have led with that probably. But it's a kind of I don't know. It's a primer. It's a young open source curious person's primer to the lingo and language that happens in those communities, and it'll help you understand what people are talking about a little bit better.
Yes, about what we're talking about in some of these episodes. But yeah, and we're ramping up on some more interview episodes, some more project deep dives and stuff like that as well on that show.
Yeah. I'm excited about bringing our editor Sabrina, and things are going well over there. So hopefully back to a more regular schedule here too.
Yes.
Yeah, and I guess that's it for us this week. Thanks everybody for listening, and we will see you next week.